You're listening to the Author Stories Podcast, bringing you the story behind the stories and the storytellers.
Margaret White,
Terry Brooks,
Sheena Kamal,
Matthew Quick,
JT Ellison,
Walt D. Williams,
Brad Thor,
Corey, Dr. O,
Brandon Sanderson,
Robin Mom,
Ernest Klein, Jim Butcher,
Charlene Harris.
Visit hankgarner.com for archives of all the shows. Today's guest is Jessica Barry. Welcome to Author Stories. Find archives of all the shows at hankgarner.com, and while you're there, never miss an episode by subscribing to the show on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Stitcher, Spotify, and YouTube. It's free on all platforms. Thanks to our two sponsors for today's show, Robert Cruzy and M.G. Herron. Out today, Book 3 of the Saga of the Iron Dragon, the conclusion of the epic series that began with the dream of the Iron Dragon. 9th century Iceland, 3 explorers from the far future have a daunting mission. To save humanity, they must build a craft capable of reaching the stars. The Voyage of the Iron Dragon is the concluding book in the Iron Dragon trilogy. The Iron Dragon trilogy is being produced as part of the phenomenally successful Saga of the Iron Dragon Kickstarter, which raised over $10,000. Meticulously researched and packed with action, The Dream of the Iron Dragon is a must for sci-fi and alternate history fans. Also, Book 2, The Dawn of the Iron Dragon, is available now from audible.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. M.G. Herron's The Translocator is out now on audible.com. Go to mgherron.com/ASP. That's for Author Stories Podcast. A revolutionary quantum teleportation device promises to bring humanity one step closer to the stars, until it fails spectacularly. Archaeologist Eliana Fisk is ripped from Earth while the whole world watches. She lands on a strange new world inhabited by a lost tribe of ancient Mayans. Meeting them, getting first-hand exposure to age-old customs and rituals, it seems like an archaeologist's dream. But what if their rituals have a darker meaning? What if the god these people pray to is no god at all? And how in the world will she ever get back home? Thus begins a pulse-pounding race against time that hurls Eliana into a great unknown, revealing ancient technologies and marvelous mysteries more outlandish than she ever imagined. The Translocator is an action-packed sci-fi thriller perfect for fans of Stargate, the Atlantis Gene, and other archaeology-inspired science fiction adventures. Go to mgherron.com/ASP. Now on to our show. Well, thanks for joining me again for the Author Stories Podcast, where I bring you the story behind the stories and the storytellers. You guys, today I am really excited to have Jessica Barry on the show with me today. She has a fantastic new novel called Freefall, and if you guys follow me on Instagram or Facebook, you know that I posted a couple photos of this book when I got it from the publisher, and it's it has one of those covers that immediately grab you, and you're like, oh, I need to know what this book is about, and that's your downfall, because once you pick it up, you won't be able to put it down. It's one of those books. So Jessica, welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks so much for having me.
I'm excited to have you. I'm a big fan of the book. I love what you're doing. But before we can talk about all that stuff, we begin each show with the same question. And that question is, what is your first memory of wanting to be a writer or storyteller?
Well, when I was 3 years old, I dictated a story to my mom about, I think it involved a bumblebee and a queen. I don't know exactly how the story unfolded from there, but that was the kind of first taste that I had of it. And yeah, I guess from there, that was my first, taste of storytelling.
A bumblebee and a queen.
Bumblebee and a queen. Can't go wrong.
You can't go wrong, and there's been some iconic stories that have began, along those lines. Were you a big reader as a kid?
Yeah, I was a huge reader. I remember specifically reading Gone with the Wind when I was in, I think, 5th grade. And I remember my teacher seeing it on my desk and being like, are you sure that you should be reading that book? And it was actually my mom who'd given it to me. So I was like, yes, it's fine. But yeah, I mean, I was always reading from a really young age.
What kinds of stories were the things that really opened up your imagination?
I went through a huge Nancy Drew thing when I was probably in third grade. And we were members of our local library, and we were there every week. And I went through, they had the entire like original leather-bound 50-book set. And I read every single one of them, and I just loved them. And I loved the way that they constructed the mysteries. I'm sure if I don't know, I haven't read them in such a long time. I don't know if I would go back and they would be disappointing. But I remember at the time they really opened up my mind in terms of mystery reading.
Well, whether they would be disappointing now or not, I haven't read them in a long time either. But you probably wouldn't be surprised at how many people come on the show and talk about that set of books that were just transformative for them. It's so weird when these things just kind of become iconic and influence so many of us, and it's a powerful thing, I guess.
It's funny, isn't it? I mean, I can literally still smell what those books smelled like, you know? They really stayed with me. Yeah.
It's one of those things like when you hear your first Beatles album or something. It's just one of those things that sticks with you.
Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
Totally.
So, when you began writing and telling your own stories, was there ever an adult, a teacher, a parent who recognized that you had something, that storytelling gene, or that you were maybe just better at it than other students? Did you ever have an experience like that?
Yeah, I mean, my mom has always been incredibly encouraging of me in my writing. Long before I thought that I could do it, she thought that I could do it, which was very nice. And I had a few teachers when I was in elementary school who recognized that I had a kind of voracious appetite for reading and also was, you know, quite into storytelling. So they encouraged me along the way. I remember my third grade teacher in particular, Mrs. White, was a real gem. And I remember my mom telling me that she had told my mom that she thought that I could be a writer one day, which is very sweet.
Nice.
So, yeah.
What did you study in college?
English literature and art history. I started out as an archaeology major, though, insanely. I thought that was like, this is it, I'm going to be an archaeologist. And then I got to college and did a semester of archaeology and realized that it was a lot of like math and spreadsheets. And I was like, oh, maybe this isn't what I want to do. And swiftly changed majors to English lit, which was much more my lane.
You are not the first person to say that they wanted to study archaeology until you get to college and go, this is very little Indiana Jones.
Yeah, exactly. Exactly. This is like less kind of National Geographic and more like those little plotting squares. And I was just like, I can't. No, this is not for me.
Like this going to be a lot of math and using those little brushes that take forever to.
It seems like you need a lot of patience, and I don't necessarily have a lot of patience. I'm not sure.
So what led you over to literature and art history?
So literature was because I just had this kind of, it didn't feel like school to me. It felt like just what I would do anyway. So it was such a pleasure actually to be able to spend 4 years. And then I ended up doing a master's in literature as well. So technically 5 years just reading books and talking about them and writing about them, which was just a real dream. And then the art history, that came a little bit later. I think my mom was an art teacher and when I was growing up. And so there was always kind of art around the house. And then when I was in college, I did a semester abroad in London and took a lot of art history classes when I was over. And in London, they have this amazing system where all the museums are free. And if you have like a student card, then the exhibitions are free too. So I spent a huge amount of my time during that semester just kind of wandering around the Tate and the National Gallery. And I really just kind of fell in love with it. So I ended up combining those two towards the end of my degree.
That is amazing. My middle daughter just finished her first semester in art school as she's a graphic design major, and it was so funny because she's the kid that has just drawn and doodled and painted her entire life. There's just never been a time that she didn't do it, and she went directly in and she just finished her first semester, and it was like she never had a day of school. She woke up early every morning to go, work on her next project and stuff like that. And I said, that was not my experience in college. So there's something about finding that passion and pursuing it that is just completely different.
Yeah. And it's amazing. And because it just makes life easier, because you're just, I'd be doing this anyway. So this is great that I get the chance to have the time to do it full time. It's a real luxury.
So you moved to London, to pursue your master's. Was that in history, in art history?
No, it was in literature. So it was this degree program at UCL that was like 20th century literature, but had a very broad curriculum, which was sort of a combination of literature, but also like some art, some culture, some theory. So it was a really wide ranging degree. But it was good. It was I had this idea in my head when I was doing it that I was going to go on and become an academic and do a PhD. And the master's degree was very helpful in that it made me realize that that's not what I wanted to do. I was like, oh no, I don't want to do this. So it was a great year. But I don't know how helpful it was in terms of academics. But yeah, it was fun. And it got me to London, and I bartended through it. So I became a very good bartender. That's what I got for my master's degree. A real knack of bartending.
It works out good for parties for the rest of your life.
Yeah, it's a good party trick to have. It's very true.
So at what point during all of this travel and higher education did you begin to write seriously for yourself?
Honestly, not until much later. So I only started writing when I was in my late 20s. I got married really young, and then we separated and I got divorced. And so I was newly single, and I was 28. And I decided that kind of ease myself back into the world of dating, I would start this blog about dating. And so that's the thing that sort of started me writing. And from there, I kind of realized how much I enjoyed doing it and enjoyed kind of storytelling. And then I made the leap from doing kind of personal stories to fiction from there.
There was a time a few years ago where blogging was a huge catalyst for a lot of writers, and I'm kind of sad to see that social media has kind of eaten up a lot of that.
I know. I think you're right, and I think that it's also sad to like websites like the Hairpin, which were so great about getting kind of young female voices out there, have now shut, and it feels like there are fewer and fewer outlets for people to kind of share long form stuff, because I think people are so much more used now to using Twitter and Instagram, which is great in its own way, but doesn't allow you to kind of dig in there the way that blogging or long form essays did.
Yeah, I mean, there's something to be said for sitting down with a thought, writing it to its conclusion, sitting for a little bit, editing, before hitting that publish button. It's just so easy to just hop on Twitter and just, post a screed, that doesn't get to the heart of what you are actually trying to do. And, I don't know. It's, the world changes. We can't hang on to everything, but, I think there's a reason that a lot of writers, kind of cut their teeth on blogging there for a while. I think it allowed you the time to actually craft what you were going to say.
Yeah, I think you're totally right. And I think that that's so much of writing is just sitting there waiting for the idea to come and then shaping it. And I think that blogging and things like that did allow you that space. And then it did allow you like a feedback too. So, maybe there would be 3 people reading your blog, but those are 3 people who would occasionally send you a comment and say, this is good, or I don't like this. And that's really constructive, I think.
Yeah. Yeah. Especially when you build a, air quotes relationship, there where, it's not just some person driving by that because they saw a hashtag and just, unleash their opinion. There's a kind of a community that builds up around it.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly.
So, the new book we mentioned is Freefall. This is more of a psychological thriller. What was your, I know you love Nancy Drew and that mystery, kind of seed was planted early. But what led you to psychological thrillers and these, stories of kind of mind games?
Well, I think that thrillers allow you to delve into a person's thought process in a way that other genres don't in some ways. And so, like, you get to see a person under enormous stress and how they react to it. And that's that's a gold mine for a writer, right? So I think that there's so much material that comes out of writing suspense and putting your characters into those situations that it can be really satisfying. So that's been really nice to delve into. And I think, the original idea, frankly, wasn't necessarily to write a psychological thriller. It was I had the idea about this woman being involved in a plane crash, and that was the kind of seed of it. And then from there, it ended up turning into a thriller. So it's sort of, I had the idea first, and then the genre kind of built itself around it. So,
we've really got two kind of main characters that we're introduced to. We've got Allison Carpenter, who, I don't think this is much of a spoiler. She's involved in a tragedy, kind of right off. Tell us where did Allison come from, and what was that initial idea for this tragedy?
So the initial idea came from a news article I read maybe 4 years ago now about a teenage girl who was involved in a plane crash in, I think, Washington State, and she was on this like tiny little single-engine plane with her grandparents, and the plane went down, and her grandparents terribly died in the crash. But she was sort of fine. She, I think, maybe had like a bruised rib or something, but was otherwise unscathed. And she made the decision to walk for 2 days and 2 nights. I think it ended up being through the wilderness with like no food, no water, nothing, until she was rescued, until she crossed a road and then somebody picked her up. And that story just completely shocked me. The idea that somebody could survive something like that, not only the physical trauma of it, but also the emotional trauma, and just that will to survive. And from there, I became like my Google history from then on was like a little bit weird for a couple of months. I just like kept researching like all of these stories about people who had been involved in plane crashes and survived. And so that sort of was the spark for me, is wondering how somebody reacts in one of those situations and what the will to survive can do to somebody.
So we've got Allison who crashes in this plane. Her fiancé does not make it. So Allison is all alone. And that's because that's not enough for us to worry about. Allison also is dealing with some internal things that are hers to deal with. So you kind of take us with this character and you put her in peril, and then you just keep ratcheting up, why we care about her. How long did it take for Allison to kind of fully form, in your mind and the things that you put on her? And, did you just keep saying, I'm going to see what else I can do to Allison today?
Poor Allison. Yeah, kind of. I mean, I think that the first draft of the book was very much like just her trying to survive. And then I realized that was like not necessarily enough. And there had to be a lot of reasons as to why she ended up in that place. And so from there, I just started thinking about what led her to get on that plane, what kind of life she was leading, and the run up to being in that plane. And there's an element which I'm sure you'll talk about in a second about she has this relationship with her mother, and where her and her mother are estranged. And so what led to that estrangement? Like, what does an estrangement from a parent, what would lead to that, and what would that then do to you? as the child. And so all of that was kind of in the back of my mind when I was shaping Allison's plight. But yeah, poor Allison does go through a lot.
So that other character, Maggie Carpenter, Allison's mom, is the other pivotal character in this book. And, not only are we seeing the care of one person for another, but we've got the maternal bond and the mother-daughter relationship, which I have 3 daughters. There are some complications, sometimes in mother-daughter relationships, and everyone is, strong-willed and all of that stuff. What was the catalyst to bring that into the story?
I think I find mother-daughter relationships really fascinating. And I think that it is a dynamic that holds a lot of potential for both like incredible levels of love and incredible levels of frustration. And I think particularly that transition that you go through from childhood into adulthood, where, when you're a little kid, I think that you think, your mother is like everything to you, and you think that you know her inside out, and she thinks that she knows you inside out, because when you're small, she does. And then you grow older and you end up having a life that is independent and separate from her, and you learn that she has a life that's independent and separate from yours, and that can be a really difficult transition. And so I thought that it felt like an area that was like really ripe for digging into. And I liked the idea of, because obviously Allison is in a level of peril. I liked the idea of it being her mother who is the one who's trying to save her, because that feels like that's the core of that bond, right? Like whatever happens between you and your mother, like she's always going to try to save you no matter what. And so that's kind of where that came from.
The other kind of outstanding character in the book is the wilderness itself, and the place where Allison finds herself in trouble and fighting to survive. You talked about your Google search history and, all of the research that you did there, but it's a very visceral experience when you're reading. Were you ever on site to kind of get ideas and little details to put in, or how did you make that so real for us?
Well, thanks. I'm glad you felt that way. That's really nice to hear. No, I didn't get the chance to go to the Rockies. So it's not firsthand. It's just like a ton of research. So I did a lot of research into kind of survival techniques and read a lot of books about the Rockies, and did a lot of looking at pictures and trying to imagine how you would survive in a place like that. Read a lot of firsthand accounts. So all of that kind of shaped it. But yeah, it was, and my Google history for that was another. It's amazing somebody hasn't come knocking on my door with a lot of serious questions about me.
Oh, that's so funny. That's so funny. When researching the survival techniques and things like that, how did you, because you, Jessica, had all of this knowledge, how did you pass that on, to Maggie, who, is on this quest to save her daughter, but she really is kind of the perfect character for something like this. She's from Maine and, lives in the quiet, idyllic town. And now all of a sudden she kind of has to become a superhero. Yeah. How do you give that to her, while, keeping us, invested with her?
Well, I grew up with a lot of, flinty New England women. And so I
love that description.
Very flinty. And so I know, I kind of knew the type of person that she was, that, they are like, they can be like a dog with a bone. And so that's what I shaped it off of, is these women that I knew when I was growing up, who, seemed and were, incredibly lovely, very friendly, but deep down we're just hard as nails. And so Maggie, has this career that she's now retired from as a librarian at a university. So she had this kind of background in research. So that's kind of how I sort of combined the idea of somebody who would have that knowledge of how you do deep digging into something with the kind of tenacity that comes with women of a certain age from that certain place. Yeah, Maggie's my favorite.
Absolutely. You mentioned earlier that after the first draft was finished, you realized that the story needs something else, some more peril, some more depth. What is your writing process like? Are you a plotter or a pantser, as we say? Do you have an idea of where the story's going ahead of time?
I am still trying to figure out what kind of a writer I am, because I feel like I do it slightly differently every time. I try to be a plotter. That's my goal, is to be a plotter. But what happens is that even if I spend, weeks and months doing an incredibly detailed outline of, chapter 1, chapter 2, here are all the character breakdowns. When I end up writing it, things kind of tend to go off the rails and the story kind of takes over. And then there's always this point halfway through writing a book where I go back and look at the kind of outline in my notes. I'm like, oh, I haven't done that. That's not what I've written at all. How did this happen? So it's a combination of both, really, of trying to make sure that there's a structure in place and I know who the characters are before I start, but then also acknowledging that the story at some point, if it's going well, will kind of take over, and allowing it to do what it wants within reason.
I did a show with fantasy author Jamie Castle last week, and he talked about that he outlines after the fact. So when he finishes a chapter, he has a document open where he kind of writes down the pertinent points that happened in that, and you kind of develop a skeleton after the fact, but kind of keeps a roadmap so that he feels that he's giving himself things to keep bouncing off of for future chapters. And
such a good idea. I might steal that. That's
I know. I was like, gosh, I should do that. I think a lot of authors are kind of in that in between, where another friend of mine calls what he does pantsing with a plan. So he kind of has some road markers along the way. Okay, I know the story's going to go here and then eventually going to go here. Now, what they do in between those is completely up to the characters.
Yeah.
And I really kind of like that idea too.
Yeah.
Do you get into the writing and the characters just take on a life of their own?
Yeah. And I find that often happens, with dialogue. So
Yes.
It's like I'll have this idea of how the conversation should go in my head, and then I sit down to write it, and then I write it, and then I'm like, oh, I've written something. That exchange was completely different in the end. And sometimes that's good, and sometimes it's bad. But there is something really satisfying about this idea of like, these are voices that are not my own that are coming out, and just letting them say what they want is really fun, and often leads to, sometimes it's a disaster and I've got to go back and rewrite it, but sometimes like that's actually when you get like the gems too, is
Yes.
when the characters kind of take over and say what they want to say rather than what you want them to say.
Well, writing is one of those very few professions where you can talk about the voices in your head and how these imaginary people do things and we laugh about it. And, oh, that's great. And you get to go on about your life. If the plumber who comes to your house starts talking like that, you're going to have an issue probably.
That's true. Although I come from a long line of people who talk to themselves all the time. So in my house, we're just all wandering around all the time, muttering to ourselves. So it was quite
Right.
for me. Yeah.
Well, growing up in the South, we say that, we have crazy relatives and we don't hide them. We put them on the front porch for everybody to see, so it's probably a culture.
Yeah.
Jessica, the new book Freefall is absolutely fantastic. When you got to the end of it, when you're writing thriller and psychological thriller, how do you know that the story is finished? When you're someone who likes to edit and to, you do a first draft, you look at it, okay, this needs this, and then you go through it again. Is there a point where you become completely satisfied with the story? Or, is it one of those things where, I could keep on and I just have to finally, let it go and the story is what it is?
Yeah, I think if I was allowed to work on something in perpetuity, I would probably do it. Like, I think that you get to points with the draft where you think that you're like, okay, I think I'm done. That's it. And then maybe a month later, you look at it again and you're like, oh, actually, no, like I can do this all over again. For Freefall, I think I ended up doing, I think it was like 9 drafts. It was a lot of drafts. And there was definitely a moment where I was like, there's a lot of despair. I can't do this anymore. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I think that's where having good readers, great agent, a great editorial team comes in so handy, because they're the ones who can tell you. Like, I think there is a kind of woods through the trees moment that happens with every book, and you need like external people come in and say, okay, it's done, or okay, it's not done. Here's how you can improve it. So yeah, I'm really glad that I have that, because otherwise I think I probably would just be, if you gave me the manuscript of Freefall right now, I would probably be like, oh, okay, I'll have another go. Very glad it happened, but yeah.
Well, it is an exceptional book. I'm going to recommend it to everyone. There's going to be a link to it in the show notes. Freefall, your debut, psychological thriller novel. This book is superb. Jessica, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show. If people are just learning about you, is there a place where they could connect with you online or maybe learn more about what you do?
I'm on Twitter, but I'm not like a big tweeter, but if somebody tweets at me, I will always respond. And I'm on Instagram too, where I post mainly photographs of my cats. So if you're interested in 2 cats, come on down.
Excellent. Jessica, thank you so much for taking time to come on the show today.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thanks for listening to the Author Stories podcast. For more great author interviews like this one, go to hankgarner.com and dig through the archives. There's something there I know you'll love. Now stay tuned for a special audio clip from Richard Gleaves' The Jason Crane series.
7 men ran the farce. The 7 witch hunters. The court of Oyer and Terminer. They tortured and lied and mutilated and murdered. They knew those women up in Salem Village were no witches. Their true target was the coven hidden in their own midst here in Salem town. They meant to hang the innocent until the sisters surrendered. Did they surrender? Said Jason. No. Was that the wrong decision? To let innocent women die and save themselves? What do you think? Should the coven have fought openly? Created more hysteria by swooping in on broomsticks and casting spells over Salem? Should they have killed the judges? There are no right decisions. That is the horror of a witch hunt. Everything you do condemns you. Question the judge, thou art a defiant witch. Question his laws, you question the king, and thou art a treasonous witch. Question his superstitions, you question scripture, and thou art a blasphemous witch. Pity the condemned, you pity witches, and thy Christian mercy proves thy collusion with Satan. Witch hunters are not just bad lawyers practicing bad law. They are men who place the ends before the means. They choose their victim, a man, a woman, an entire race, and mark them for extinction. All evidence is damning evidence. All associations are damning associations. All infractions, and who among us is without sin, are unforgivable infractions. Their own failings and abuses of power are shrugged away as mere vigor in pursuit of the public good. A witch hunter will have you by whatever means necessary. If he cannot find evidence, he will create evidence. He will entrap you and question you and distort what you say. He will walk you through the night until your feet bleed, strip you and stripe you, dress you in your own filth until you forget you are human. He will torture your friends until they betray you. And if anyone dares to weep at your hanging, he will drag them to Gallows Hill in the back of the next ox cart. Any man can be a witch hunter. All it takes is hatred and arrogance, and the preening self-regard that proclaims, "My deeds are always good because they are my deeds." The 7 judges of the Salem court were such men. But one witch stood up to them. She stood up to centuries of unchallenged murderous dogma and pronounced the magic word, no. They burned her for it.